Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Also, if you are looking for something new and different for the upcoming Compliance Week celebration in November, check out The Compliance Kids. It's my 3-book children's series on compliance and compliance professionals for children. But they make great gifts and great training tools for your employees. You can check it out on Amazon.com. We've linked to it in the show notes. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
If you're a compliance officer, middle managers are crucial in getting your programs from you to your frontline employees. But how do we activate those managers and get them on our side? Ethico's new Middle Manager Toolkit equips you with the skills needed to empower your managers, to promote a culture where ethical behavior thrives and employees feel empowered to speak up. Learn how to turn frontline managers into ethical leaders with our new white paper, Empowering Middle Managers as Ethics Champions. And did I mention you can get the whole toolkit for free? Head to ethico.com to download the full toolkit today.
10 for 10 for the week ending December 7, 2024. Our first story comes to us from the Department of Justice. In a press release, they announced that McKinsey & Company Africa has agreed to pay over $122 million in connection with its bribery of South African government officials. McKinsey, the U.S. company, said that it had distanced itself from the South African business unit and had terminated the South African managing director involved in the bribery and corruption. Next up from the Financial Times, it's a series of articles, and we've only linked to one, but check out the FT on the Trafigura trial, which is going on in Switzerland as the Chief Operating Officer, Michael Wainwright, is accused of bribery. And it's been a wild first week as they tried to throw out the co-defendant, or rather the additional person who was engaged in the bribery and corruption. And then Wainwright declared that he really wasn't aware of the compliance committee the company had. It really speaks to a completely toxic culture at Trafigura. The first of a couple of articles from the Wall Street Journal. In a major case in Texas, the federal judge rejected Boeing's plea deal around the selection of the monitor. There were 2 reasons given. One was the DEI requirement for the selection of the monitorship. The court said did not ensure top competency, and the court was concerned with the monitor selection and court oversight, which the Department of Justice tried to take away from the court. So it's going to be interesting to see how this moves forward. From the New Republic, not an often contributor to this series, but they say announced that the first scandal of the Trump administration is here. And it's a very interesting case. It involves Justin Sun. If that name sounds familiar, he's the person who paid $6 million to eat a banana. But he bought some $24 million in tokens from Trump's crypto company, a startup. And what's interesting is that there had only been 22 million sold so far, and 75% of the revenues go to President Trump. So was this a business investment? Was this a preemptive bribe? Was this corruption at the most basic level? It's not clear at this point which any of those might be, but it certainly points how you can pay money to Trump and perhaps get away with it. Next up, the Delaware court, which invalidated the pay package of Elon Musk, or Tesla's pay package for Elon Musk, also has invalidated the second pay package, which followed a shareholder vote earlier this year approving it. And the court said you can't overrule a court decision by simply remedying the situation and having another vote. She ordered the entire pay package be rescinded, and finding that the directors were still beholden to Musk, and the approval process lacked transparency. So where Trump or the court goes from there is an open question. Our next story to us comes from Bloomberg, which reports that a Trump-appointed federal district judge in the great state of Texas has invalidated, or rather put an injunction against, the Corporate Transparency Act on a nationwide basis. This is sort of typical of Trump judges, something they don't like, they try to get rid of. Whether this holds up on appeal, of course, it goes to the angels of death in the Fifth Circuit, so expect it to, and the Supreme Court will have to answer this question. In a wild story, it appears that an employee from Macy's hid $154 million in delivery expenses over several years. It's not clear why the employee may have done this, but it may require a restatement by Macy's. The employee did not take the money themselves, and it's not clear what, if anything, this employee might be charged with. Next up, from the Financial Times, crypto advocate Paul Atkins has been picked by Donald Trump to chair the Securities and Exchange Commission. This certainly will change the SEC's attitude towards crypto, and it's going to be interesting to see if they actually do anything or move in to regulate crypto, because in its prior incarnation during the pandemic and immediately thereafter, crypto was the Wild West, literally, with fraudsters running everywhere. It's not clear if the DOJ or the SEC will do anything about that. Next up, from McKnight's Long-Term Care News, an article about the OEG's intent to hold individual executives and investors liable for nursing home missteps. This new guidance, or rather updates guidance for skilled nursing facilities. It's the first update since 2008, and it expands information on risk areas for nursing facilities, recommends mitigating those risks, and tips on implementing and evaluating, updating compliance and quality programs. Our next story comes to us from Mortgage News Daily, and that publication reports that it's getting difficult, or at least more challenging, in the home purchase arena. Why? Because of requirements around money laundering, beneficial owners, and issues that the CTA tried to address, but these come from the CFPB's proposal addressing the selling of housing, and or selling of data, rather. And so it's going to be very, very interesting to see about this issue going forward, because there's nothing more ubiquitous in the United States than the buying and selling of houses. So check out this article, and if you're in that industry, you may need some additional compliance work for you. I'd like to tell you about not a new podcast, but a new season 2 of Classroom Insiders, which is Karen Woody's great podcast, where she takes a look at insider trading with students from her class. So check out Classroom Insiders Season 2 on the Compliance Podcast Network. 10 for 10 is a special production of the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, our network sponsor is Ethico, and they've got a great new service offering for you, a Middle Manager's Toolkit. We've linked to it in the show notes, and it's available to you at no cost. Many companies struggle with getting information to middle managers, which allows them to be the first line of response in a speak-up culture, and Ethisphere has answered this challenge by putting together a middle manager's toolkit. Check it out in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.